Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the all-wheel drive Mustang project. Another couple of weeks of great progress on the car. I've been focusing on a few things related to the transmission, namely the shifter, and so I'm going to go over my shifter linkage and its mount in detail in this episode, so let's get into it. So my original plan to use a GT500 shifter intended for an S197 Mustang didn't work out. It's basically too tall, too bulky, and so after doing a little bit more research, I stumbled upon using a shifter intended for a TR6060 and a Gen 5 Camaro. But of course it'll need some modification. I basically have to take the extra brackets off and then machine the bottom off. The lip on the bottom that you see in this picture is intended for a seal, and I need to be able to mount it to some brackets. So that's the first step, is basically cutting off this lip on the bottom of the Gen 5 Camaro shifter base. It was a pretty simple operation to put the shifter base in the mill and use an end mill to basically machine it to a controlled height. Didn't do any kind of fancy CNC, of course, just used the cranks and away we went. Made pretty easy work of the whole project. So here's the completed modified 5th gen Camaro shifter. Basically we machined the flange off that was part of the original design, and then drilled and countersunk for some socket-headed cap screws 4 holes to mount it to a new base. That is the next step in the custom shifter project. First step in making the shifter base was to cut out some stock and square it up, and then we basically drilled all the holes first. There's 4 holes that mount the shifter to this base, and then there's 4 holes that go all the way through to mount it to the bracket that's part of the transmission or the transfer case. We actually programmed this in the Fusion 360 and having it do a PEC, which was kind of new to us and took a little bit of figuring out, but it worked out pretty well. The next step was to machine the first layer, or the first level of the perimeter of the part that the shifter bolts to actually. And once again, this was all modeled, and then Fusion 360 was used to create a toolpath, using WD-40 as a lubricant and going pretty slow. As I mentioned in a couple other videos, this isn't mass production. Slow and steady wins the race. But as you can see, the surface finish came out pretty good, and the final part turned out excellent. So, pretty excited about how this all turned out. Next, some countersinks were put in for the screws that hold this base to the shifter bracket that's part of the transfer case assembly. This was mostly for looks, but it turned out pretty nice. Here we're starting to hog out the middle using some 2D adaptive clearing. Once again, all programmed in Fusion 360. Using I believe it was a 3-flute 3/8 end mill optimized for aluminum. It does a pretty good job, and for the speeds and feeds we're using, it cuts pretty good. Here we're doing the lower perimeter of the part, and once again this turned out pretty nice. Putting some chamfers on the part for that finishing touch. So all the top operations are done on the new shifter base that will adapt the Gen 5 Camaro shifter to my custom brackets. Next, the part was flipped over and fly cut to the final height using my 3-inch fly cutter. It makes pretty quick work of the project. I'm at 50%. It's going to start. Harold's trying a new scheme here. This could go horribly wrong. It's possible. Here we go. Here we started adding all the bottom features to the part. Basically, you know, blowing through the center hole and adding all the clearance for the shift mechanism. Once again using 2D adaptive from Fusion 360. This was really a fun part to make and figure out how to machine and get all the settings right. As you probably heard in the couple comments in the background noise, is we were messing around with different feeds and speeds and ship loads, just try to make it a little bit fun and see if we can get the machine a little bit faster. So here's the completed shifter base / adapter. As you can see in the bottom here, it's got clearance for the shift lever to go back and forth and fore and aft, and then clearance here for the shift rod to go forward to hook up to the transmission. Then the modified MGW shifter can just plop on right there, and a couple of screws or 4 screws go on to hold it to the base. My first attempt at the shifter here. This rod is just a stock Camaro rod cut with a little extender put on it. This was just going to be temporary, but it works just fine. So I think I'm just going to weld this better and flapper wheel it back and make it look a little better and paint it black and put it back, as they say. So, and this is the machine base, and this is the modified Gen 5 Camaro MGW shifter base. And you can kind of see down here, there's, you know, how that works basically. And so now I need to add the reverse lockout lever and a little wall here for the reverse lockout. But before I do all that, I'm going to get it back in the car and verify this actually fits. Here's the first attempt at having the shifter actually in the car. It actually fits quite well. It's a little off center because currently the transfer case is hitting the power tunnel a little bit, so I have to do a little massaging to get it to go towards the driver's seat. But I think it's going to work out pretty nice. So I have to add the reverse lockout. This isn't the final handle, as I've shown in a different part of the video. You can also see where the transfer case is going to be sitting relative to the body. I just bent this up, but clocking the transfer case down the 10 degrees really helped. I think this can be really much flatter. My goal is to be able to have the seats in and the power seat to be able to go forward without hitting the floor. So I'm going to get this as low as possible and fill all this in. But before doing that, I got to make a cross member. We'll get the transmission centered in the car, make a cross member, and then I'm going to finalize the shifter before I worry about the hole in the floor, I think. But yeah, this is a pretty huge step. I'm shifting the car, or shifting the transmission inside the car with a pretty workable system. I also needed a solution for the reverse lockout. You know, a T56 or a TR6060 actually has a fully synchronized reverse gear. And so if you don't have a reverse lockout, it's actually quite easy to get into reverse versus 6th gear. And that could be, you know, very bad on the highway, we'll say. And normally on the TR6060 there's like an electric solenoid on the side of the transmission that is the reverse lockout. That's controlled by the computer in the car. Well, all that's gone. You know, it's normally in the tail housing of the transmission, and I don't have a tail housing anymore, right? So I need to incorporate that. And so my plan is to incorporate it into the shifter itself, just like an MT82. Now here's my shifter base, and here's actually, when it comes from MGW for the Camaro, it actually has this little NVH isolator in it, which it's kind of why it has this square protrusion on there, is to isolate the upper half from the lower half. Anyways, I took that out, and actually for all my mock-ups in the video that you've already seen, I basically just took a different shifter handle and put some duct tape around it to shove it in that hole just so I can make it work. But the final goal here is basically I'm gonna take this apart, of course, and cut this off. And then I called up MGW. They've been really fantastic, and spent quite a bit of time on the phone with me. And this is a shift handle from an Mgw shifter for an MT82, which is the normal transmission that comes in a Mustang. And they have a reverse lockout. And so I'm going to basically cut this off, you know, right in here someplace, and TIG weld it to the Camaro base. And this will then incorporate the reverse lockout. And this, I'll mount it backwards, because in an MT82, reverse is actually over to the left and forward, and on a TR6060 it's actually to the right and forward. So I'll basically mount it, you know, if you can envision mounting it this way, and you'll have to basically push the handle down to get past a little wall I need to build in order to be able to move it over and up to the right to get it into reverse. So this MGW shifter handle for the MT82 is actually obviously multiple pieces, and it's spring loaded, so when you can basically push it down, as you can see here. And so then this pin is also adjustable for in and out, and this is really an awesome design, and there was no reason for me to try to design this, which, you know, and duplicate it, when I could just buy it from MGW as a complete solution. You know, obviously it's not the right base, I'll cut it off, weld it, etc., etc. Yeah. So when you want to put it in reverse, you'll have to push the handle down and then over, and it'll already go up. So I just need to build a little wall that'll bolt to the top of the Camaro shifter base that has basically a groove in it, so you can't push it over into reverse unless you push the handle down and over. Well, that's a wrap on episode 11. Once again, some really good progress, and I'm going to be moving on to finishing the reverse lockout. I'm actually already making good progress on a transmission cross member, but that'll all be covered in a future episode, so please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.